1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, DFS fam? Welcome to the Week 17 edition of the OWS Angles podcast. I am your host. I am your guest. I am JMToWin. As always, throw this baby on 1.5x speed or 2x speed, and let's get started with our second to last Angles podcast of the season. I actually usually have 4 podcasts a week, but I only have this podcast and 2 more left on the season. So next week, Winner Circle podcast will be recorded on Monday. You'll be able to access that on Tuesday. And then no block party next week because Pete switches to cash games in week 18 every year. No solo ship because Squirrel will be in London. So Angles podcast next week and this week and Winner Circle. And that'll be it for me for podcasts for the season. So fun season. Let's finish out strong with a really unique slate here. And when I say unique, I mean about as unique as we can get for a main slate. So let's see, Wednesday was Christmas Day, right? So I kind of shut off internet and work stuff on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week, spent time with the family. And Wednesday evening, kind of my thought was, okay, Thursday, Friday, just packing all the work, but obviously recognizing that there'll probably be some time on Wednesday evening to start opening up the slate. So kids playing and my wife was doing some stuff. And so I opened up the slate on Wednesday evening. And that was the first time I realized that it's an 8-game slate. In my head, it was an 11-game slate. I didn't realize that there were the 3 Saturday games. And so 8 games already right off the bat, extremely unique in that regard. And then we're at this point in the season where injuries are piling up and teams don't have any reason to rush certain players back. And so we're looking at 8 or 9 backup quarterbacks on this slate out of 16 available quarterbacks. And just really gives a sense of what we're dealing with on this slate. I said in one of my write-ups in the NFL Edge this week that it feels like a Thanksgiving slate, those 3-game Thanksgiving slates, because there's so little on this slate. So I am going to go through the teams that are playing against each other just so we can kind of get a sense of what this slate provides. Then we're going to kind of take a look at what the running back position provides this week, what the wide receiver position provides this week, and strategically how we should be thinking about our builds as a result of what's being provided at those positions. We'll dig into some of the specifics of how we typically attack those positions and how we might want to think about attacking those positions this week. We'll take a look at some potential game environments and potential offenses to pay attention to, and then we will hit our bottom-up build. So if you're new here, welcome. Kind of weird. Week 17, your first time watching this. It's weird that you are still grinding. Weird that you are not only still grinding, but looking for new content if you are new here. If you are still grinding and still looking for new content at this point in the season, then OWS is probably a good fit for you. But most of you have been around all season at this point. I'm sure viewership numbers have been dropping this deep into the season because we lose people throughout the DFS season. Enthusiasm drops off around week 10, 11, 12. So for those of you who are still sticking around, thank you for sticking around. Let's get you some money this weekend. For those of you who are new, we talk all the time at OWS about DFS is not a game of picking players. In fact, I said on the show with Pete today that some of viewers, especially Pete's audience, isn't always like exact overlap with our audience. For some people who watch that show with Pete, it's probably refreshing to them. For some people, it's probably annoying to them. But we don't do the whole, this player is going to hit this week, this guy's a lock, this guy's a must play, this guy's an awful play, that whole thing, right? What we are understanding is that DFS is a game of understanding the math. It's understanding the probabilities of players hitting and how we can turn that math in our favor. And there's lots of ways we can turn that math in our favor, including a lot of strategy components. So whether that's looking for leverage off of what the field is doing, a great example of leverage would have been Jonathan Taylor last week, where Jonathan Taylor came into last week having hit 4 times in his previous 36 games, hit for 29 plus points 4 times in his previous 36 games. In fact, in 31 of those 36 games, he had gone for under 22 DraftKings points. So you're not going to look at him and say, oh, he's a really sharp play. In those 4 times that he had hit in his last 36 games, it had been 29 to 31 points. So basically, on a week where last week, what was it, like 6, 7, 8 running backs hit for around 30 points, 30 plus points? Well, what's the edge in taking a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who even when he hits is usually 30 points, and he's going to hit for 30 way less often than a lot of the other guys. And when he misses, his score is going to be lower than a lot of the other guys. What's the value in that? Typically, there's no value in that. So what is the value in playing Jonathan Taylor? Well, it is you play Jonathan Taylor when his quarterback is really popular, because we know that Jonathan Taylor does have these monster games within his range of outcomes. If he's having that monster game, it's probably taking away points from that more popular player. One of the ways we can turn the math in our favor is saying, okay, Anthony Richardson's going to be popular. This is talking week 16. Anthony Richardson's going to be popular. This is the week where we think about Jonathan Taylor. And sure, even if he hits, his likeliest outcome is that he doesn't hit. He scores under 22 points. Even if he hits, probably 29 to 30, 31 points. And we took on extra risk for a guy who put up the same score as a bunch of other guys. But on the extreme outlier scenario where he hits for 42 DraftKings points and Anthony Richardson is popular and he's taking away points from Anthony Richardson, he ends up helping you in a tournament, because he's not just helping your roster, but he's hurting other rosters. And so we're always looking for little things like that of how we can turn the math in our favor. Also, spots where we can get 2 things on our roster right, 3 things, 4 things on our roster right with 1 bet. These are the types of things we want to be thinking about. DFS is not a game of picking players. It's a game of strategy. It's a game of game theory, and it's a game of understanding the math and how we can turn things in our favor. So who are the highest probability plays on the slate? And then how do we position ourselves to take advantage of making the most money when we get those plays right? If we play that player and he ends up hitting that week, well, in isolation, that doesn't help us win a tournament. What else is there that we can do to clear out our paths to a first place finish? So this show, the Angles Podcast, again, if you want player picks, player pools, we have all that. That's in the scroll. That is my player grid is in there. Mike's player grid is in there. Sonic's MME player pool is in there. Some other player pool content type stuff is in the scroll every week. But the purpose of the Angles Podcast is to recognize that DFS is a strategy game. NFL DFS is a unique puzzle that we are solving each week. And so we use the Angles Podcast to try to get a sense of what the picture on the puzzle box, so to speak, looks like. And the picture on this week's puzzle box is very interesting, very unique. Angles Podcast is probably particularly valuable on a week like this. So starting out with running through some of the teams playing each other. We've got the Jets and the Bills. So first off, there's 6 out of 8 games outdoors. One of the indoor games is Spencer Rattler against Aiden O'Connell, so that's not that exciting. The other indoor game is obviously Jordan Love against Sam Darnold in a very interesting game in Minnesota. The other 6 games, all outdoors in December, and expecting some level of rain in all 6 of these games, and a couple of these games could be heavier rain, so we'll have to keep an eye on that as we head closer to Sunday. But Jets and Bills. Bills probably can't get the number 1 seed, or Bills definitely can't get the number 1 seed, probably can't fall down to the 3 seed, but there is still a chance that they can fall down to the 3 seed. If they lose out and Baltimore wins out, Baltimore will have the tiebreaker over the Bills. So Bills still need to try to win 1 more game. There's a big difference between the 2 seed and the 3 seed. 2 seeds, a guaranteed home playoff game in the second round. 3 seed is probably not going to end up being a home playoff game in the second round. So still expect full effort from the Bills in this one. And the Jets at this point, lost season, right? But they're not playing down the stretch like it's a lost season on offense. Aaron Rodgers is clearly wanting to make sure that he has the option to play next year if he decides to play next year. So we know how Rodgers will be. He will go into the offseason not knowing if he's going to retire or not. He will wait to make a decision. He'll make a decision. All of that will get dragged out. But he also needs teams to want him. And so this end of season stretch for Aaron Rodgers, as he's been getting healthier, as he and Devontae Adams have reestablished their connection, has very much been an audition for Aaron Rodgers. And we've seen him playing his best football down the stretch. So very interesting game environment where can the Jets push the Bills the way that the Rams did, the way that the Lions did? Almost certainly not. That's not the style or structure of the Jets offense. But can this be a competitive, higher scoring game in the context of this slate? Absolutely. So that's an interesting one to be thinking about and paying attention to. Next up, Tennessee at Jacksonville. So you have a Tennessee defense that was good throughout the season, but really effort has been an issue for Tennessee in recent weeks. And then Jacksonville defense that's bad. You've got Mason Rudolph against Mac Jones, but also these bad defenses. You've got offensive-minded coaches. You have weapons in Calvin Ridley and Brian Thomas Jr. So this is certainly a sneaky game with shootout potential where it won't be surprising if both these teams score 22 or fewer real-life points, but it also won't be surprising if this game ends up being competitive, if this game ends up being higher scoring. So that's a very interesting game to think about on this slate where everything's pretty thin across the board. Where can we gain an edge? It's thinking outside the box and maybe thinking about a game like that. Las Vegas at New Orleans. Actually, let me go back to this Tennessee-Jacksonville game. So I just finished. Usually I do the Angles podcast before my show with my solo ship show with Squirrel Patrol. He is flying out to London today. So we recorded that first. I'm recording the Angles podcast second. So coming off doing that show, typically, so Squirrel Patrol, if you're not familiar with him, one of the best DFS players in all sports. Millie Maker winner last year, constantly, multiple live final tickets, big wins every season. And a lot of times, he and I hop on our Friday show, and what you'll notice from Squirrel is when he's talking through quarterbacks or offensive game environments, it's usually going to be good players and or quarterbacks with rushing upside, right? Today, he was talking about Tennessee-Jacksonville as one of the main games that was standing out to him, which to me illustrates the type of slate that this is, where somebody as sharp as Squirrel and with as good of an understanding as he has of like, typically over time, you're going to make the most money just betting on good players. This is the type of slate where somebody like him was like, yeah, Mason Rudolph, Mac Jones is actually a really interesting spot to me, interesting spot for stacks. And so keep that in mind, right? This is that type of week where spots like this could actually be what actually ends up making the difference on the slate. Now, to be clear, any games have potential to be the difference-making games on the slate. But again, we're trying to understand probabilities and what would make the most money over time. So take Las Vegas and New Orleans as an example. Are there scenarios where this game could be high scoring? Yes, but you've got Aiden O'Connell, you've got Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler has looked incapable of doing anything in terms of moving his offense. Chris Olave coming back, but you got Kendre Miller, you got no Rashid Shaheed. This is a no Taysom Hill, right? This offense is a shell of what it was at the start of the season. The Raiders are also a team that is very much in the mold of their head coach. If they have control of a game, you are not going to expect them to be dropping back relentlessly and passing the ball and trying to go up by 3 scores when they're already up by 2 scores. The Raiders are going to, if they are in control of a game, they're going to try to maintain that control, avoid mistakes, bleed the clock, and shorten the game. So very low probability of that game shooting out. Doesn't mean that there are not individual pieces in that game that could be worth considering, but just in terms of what this slate provides from a game environment perspective, not one that really stands out this week. Next up, we have Carolina and Tampa. Interesting one where Tampa tied with the Bills for the highest implied team total on the slate. Much more concentrated offense than the Bills. So we know where the ball is going on this offense. No K. Dotton this week. Obviously, we've had no Chris Godwin for a while. So at this point, yeah, Payne Durham is going to fill in at tight end, maybe get some short area work. But this offense is the running backs, Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan. If the Bucs are scoring points, it's highly likely that on this very small, pretty thin slate, that one of the pieces from the Bucs is going to be useful on tournament rosters, right? Not to say that they will necessarily be on the tournament winners this week, but to certainly say that they are pieces that could fit on tournament winners this week. So one of Bucky Irving, Rachaad White, Jalen McMillan, Mike Evans has a pretty good shot at being on tournament winning rosters this week. Baker Mayfield certainly has upside. And what I really like about this game is Carolina 8-point underdogs, but I think that's pretty aggressive, right? I mean, Carolina, Bryce Young came back, lost to Denver, won 2 games, lost to Kansas City on a last-second field goal, lost to the Bucs in overtime when Chuba fumbled in field goal range for what would have been the game-winning kick, lost to the Eagles by 6 points on a dropped Xavier Legette touchdown pass right at the end of the game. So Panthers were that close to beating the Chiefs, that close to beating the Bucs, that close to beating the Eagles. Keep in mind, Eagles are going to be the number 2 seed in the NFC. Chiefs are already the 1 seed in the AFC. Bucs are a fringe playoff team, and then came out and beat the Cardinals, a team that was way better than people are giving them credit for. Obviously, they lost that game to the Cowboys by 16 points, where they were favored. And that one lopsided game, I think, is kind of skewing people's perspective here. But Panthers should be able to keep this game close. The chances of this just being a blowout are pretty low. Panthers should be able to keep this game close, competitive, which keeps the Bucs putting their foot on the gas throughout the game. So really like this game environment and the potential in this game environment and the potential in that Bucs offense. Next up, we have Dallas and Philadelphia. So Squirrel and I were talking about this on Solo Ship, but looking through, it seems like this game is going to draw some interest because, again, Cowboys playing well on offense and Eagles always capable of putting up points, but Cowboys defense has been really good since Micah Parsons returned, and then the Eagles defense has been top 2 or 3 defenses in the NFL since their bye week. So let's just go back through some games. Obviously, they gave up 36 points to Washington last week, but before that, 13 to Pittsburgh, 16 to Carolina, 19 to the Ravens, 20 to the Rams, 18 to Washington, 6 to Dallas, kind of a fluky 23 to Jacksonville, 17 to the Bengals, and of course 3 to the Giants and 16 to the Browns. So chances of the Cowboys, even the Cowboys playing well with Cooper Rush under center, really good backup quarterback, not an NFL starter, playing against this Eagles defense, chances of the Cowboys putting up 20 plus points, pretty low, right? Most teams are not putting up 20 points against the Eagles, and now you got Cooper Rush and no CeeDee Lamb. And then you got Kenny Pickett on the other side, where the Eagles, yeah, they want to put up stats, they want to be hitting their stride and all that, but what difference does it make if it's not Jalen Hurts out there? What they need is to win this game. So Eagles probably don't get the number 1 seed, but they do have an outside shot at the number 1 seed. So certainly going to be playing in this game, playing Saquon Barkley, playing A.J. Brown, playing Devontae Smith, not expecting Jalen Hurts to play. And so for the Eagles, it's not going to be about how we're building our offense or how we're doing anything like that. It's going to be about how do we win this game. And if they are in control on defense, then that might not mean being super aggressive on offense. So kind of likeliest outcome there is certainly a lower scoring game that doesn't take Saquon off the board, doesn't even take A.J. Brown off the board in the concentrated offense. But in terms of building around that game environment, it certainly looks like a game that's not that likely to play to the upside. Similar spot for Indianapolis, where they are needing a couple wins and help in order to make the playoffs, and they're playing the Giants in this one. So if you're Indianapolis, it's looking likely that Anthony Richardson won't play this week. Shane Steichen is the type of coach he might already know, right? And he's taking that information down to Sunday because Anthony Richardson, Joe Flacco, 2 totally different styles of quarterbacks to prepare for. And as silly as that can seem to us on the outside, that does put a strain on a coaching staff, on defensive players, to have to be coming up with 2 different game plans, learning 2 different game plans and sets of rules and all that. So if you're Shane Steichen, it makes sense to take this down to the wire, but looks like Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback in this one. So the natural thought there is, okay, well, it's Flacco. They're going to throw the ball a lot more than they do with Anthony Richardson, and that's probably true. But does that mean they're going to throw it 38 times, 40, 42 times against the Giants, a team that really can't get anything going with Drew Lock under center? Or does that mean that they're going to try to make sure they don't make mistakes, try to make sure that they control this game throughout? And again, if they make the playoffs, it's going to be Anthony Richardson under center, totally different style of offense. So it's not that important, similar to the Eagles, not that important for them to be hitting their stride with Flacco under center so much as it's important to them to win this game. So certainly think there's possibility that the Colts just boat race the Giants here, and that can be considered in your build. But it's also very possible that the Colts just kind of play to a low-scoring game in which the Giants aren't able to do anything on offense, and the Colts just control this game throughout. Miami at Cleveland. So similar situation to these other 2 teams, right? Miami needs a couple wins and needs help in order to make the playoffs, and Cleveland has been absolutely incapable of doing anything with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. Dorian Thompson-Robinson in his career now, 52% completion rate, 1 touchdown pass, 9 interceptions, just outrageously bad. And so you've got DTR against a really good Miami defense. Miami should control this game. What becomes interesting to me here is Miami is 28th in DVOA on the ground, and they're very aware of that, their inability to run the ball. And so what we've seen is obviously we saw only 34 pass attempts against San Francisco last week, but before that, Tua had 40 pass attempts against Houston. He had 47 pass attempts against the Jets. He had 46 pass attempts against Green Bay. He had 40 pass attempts in a blowout win over the Patriots and 36 pass attempts in a blowout win over the Raiders. So this team that can't really run the ball and can't really throw the ball downfield right now is just sort of treating their short area passing attack as their run game. Obviously, we look at Tua and the Dolphins in December, outdoors in Cleveland, and the immediate thought is, okay, cross that off the list. Let's move on to the next game. But on this small 8-game slate without a ton of upside available across the board, this does become a very interesting spot where could Tua end up throwing the ball 40 times, even in a game Miami controls? Could the Dolphins end up scoring 28, 31 points? Could Tua end up passing for 3 touchdowns in this spot? So I think that this is a very interesting spot to keep in mind on the Miami side. It's one of those rare times that we saw it with the Lions against the Jags, where Goff and like 3 pass catchers or 3 players on that offense and the Lions defense could all be played together. Typically, when you're playing the defense, you don't want to play the quarterback, but every once in a while you have these games where it makes sense. I do think this is one of those spots where we could see Miami defense and Tua both put up big scores on rosters together. And so very interesting game environment just to think about given the context of this slate as a whole. And then finally, of course, we have Green Bay and Minnesota. Minnesota is on the verge of getting the number 1 seed, even though nobody has talked about them all season, even though as of yesterday, they were underdogs at home against the Packers. Minnesota 13-2, they win this game, and they're 14-2 and have a showdown in week 18 with the Lions for the division championship and for the number one seed. On the flip side, the Packers are favored in this game, right? The Packers have been that good this season that on the road against this Minnesota team, they are the favored team. So their losses this year, they have lost to the Lions. They have lost to, they've lost to the Lions 2 times. And then they've lost to the Vikings, right? I mean, and the Eagles. So that's how good the Packers have been. Losses to, the number 1 and number 2 seeds, and then the other team that's competing for the number 1 and number 2 seeds, or the number 1 seed in the Vikings. So Packers, really good team, and should be a really good game. The question is it a really good game? And it's like both teams are scoring in the high 20s. Is it a really good game and one team scoring in the high 20s, one team scoring in the mid to low 20s? Is it a really good game where both teams are topping 30 points? So when you have these teams where you have really good offenses, really good defenses, sometimes the defenses emerge, right, and kind of lower the scoring ceiling. But also what you typically see is the offenses recognize that they're playing a really good offense on the other side. And so the play calling is more aggressive. The fourth down decision-making is more aggressive. All of the decision-making throughout the game is made assuming that points are going to be required when it's all said and done. And so we typically see these games end up being higher scoring. So we saw these two teams earlier in the year played a 31-29 game. We saw, again, another team with, Lions when they were healthy, really good defense, really good offense. We saw the Vikings and Lions played a 31-29 game. We saw the Packers and Lions played a 31-34 game. So that is within the range of outcomes here, one of these higher scoring games. And that makes game stacks from this game very interesting. And then obviously, you got expensive players on the Vikings. You've got, a spread the wealth offense on the Packers. And so if this plays to kind of like a 27-24 game, it's very possible that nothing from this game ends up being valuable this week. So this is one of those spots where it probably makes the most sense to be all in or off this game, right? Not a lot of one-offs from the game, but a game environment where you can bet on the game environment as a whole. And so there are some exceptions to this, and we'll talk through some of those obviously in the player grid and then a little bit as we get to the bottom-up build. But yeah, just a very interesting slate in terms of what is available and how we have to adjust our thinking as a result of what is available. So speaking of adjusting our thinking, running back position, we talk about this a lot, right? How we attack the running back position. And last week was a great example. We talked about it with the Jonathan Taylor thing of typically running back is the most projectable output you can get on the slate. It's typically the spot on your roster where you're not going to win, but where you want to make sure you don't lose. So again, last week, you go off the board, right? You take on more risk by going off the board, and you get lucky and you get 30 points from your running back or 28 points from your running back. And then you look up and it's like, 6, 7 other running backs put up 30 points, and a lot of them were high owned. And all I really did was take on more risk to get the same score that a lot of other people were getting. So that's why the running back position, oftentimes you just say, yeah, like James Cook can hit or Jonathan Taylor can hit for a monster score, but like it's so low probability that Jonathan Taylor hits for that monster score, or James Cook, it's as likely as anybody else that he hits for 30 points, but when he misses, his score is that much lower. And so these are spots where it's like, probably the sharpest thing is just to go to the safer play with that type of floor ceiling range, or better floor ceiling range, same type of ceiling range and probability of hitting that ceiling. But on this week, it's very unique. It's very different, where if we take out Saquon, how many games of 35 plus have we seen from running backs on this slate? If we take out Saquon, these are the only 2 scores from all the running backs available on the slate of 35 plus. Jonathan Taylor put up 42.8 last week. It's his 5th time in 37 games. It's his 6th time in 37 games, just topping 22 points, right? It's his 5th time in 37 games, topping 29 points. It's his first time in 37 games, topping 31 points, right? So he's probably not going to do that again. Capable of doing it. 42.8 last week. And then Chuba Hubbard, a game of 35.5, obviously playing this really good Bucs run defense where teams typically pass against the Bucs. So those are the 2 guys out of all the games, right? We're in week 17. So we've got 16 weeks of the season behind us. How many players have scored 35 plus outside of Saquon? Just these two times. We swing over to the wide receiver position. Devontae Adams has put up 45.8. Jerry Jeudy, obviously different situation now with DTR, but Jerry Jeudy has put up 43.5. Jordan Addison has put up 42.3. Mike Evans has put up 39.9. Justin Jefferson has put up 39.4 and 35.2. Jaden Reed has put up 36.1. Brian Thomas Jr. has put up 35.5. Let me also draw attention to the price tags on some of these guys, right? Devontae Adams, obviously 7.1K, but Jordan Addison down here at 6.2K. Jaden Reed, 5.9K. Brian Thomas Jr., even 6.8K. So you're getting higher production at lower price tags. And so on this particular week where we have fewer games, and that means fewer running backs, and that means fewer running backs who have that opportunity to score 30 plus. And so then you think about, where do I want to prioritize my salary on this particular week? In fact, we could go a layer deeper and look at, just in terms of, these are kind of some loose numbers, okay? But I'm going to put some, we always say if you can demystify the slate for yourself, that's going to help you a lot. So one of the easiest ways to demystify the slate, it's one of the main things we mean when we talk about demystifying the slate, is people will say, is this guy a good play? Okay, well, what's your target score from this guy? He's 6K. You want him to be able to score 24 points, but also ideally have upside for 30. Okay, what is 30 points for him, right? If it's a running back, we're talking DraftKings, you're talking 100 yards and a touchdown and 6 catches for 50 yards, right? Can he do that? Is this player capable of doing that? If he can't catch 6 passes for 50 yards, then is this player capable of catching 2 for 30 and scoring that extra touchdown, getting the 2 touchdown game, right? You got to understand, like, turning into raw numbers, what would a 30-point score look like? What do those stats look like? And how does this player get to those types of stats? How frequently does this player get to those types of stats? Another way to demystify the slate and turn things into raw numbers is putting a percentage likelihood number on players. So in terms of what these players have done over the last couple of years or throughout this season, if they're in a new role, new team, whatever, what this player's usage looks like, what this player's matchup looks like, what this player's game environment looks like, how likely are we to get, let's say, these high-priced guys? How likely are we at running back to get 27 plus points? So I kind of went through all these players last night. I'm going to read off some numbers to you. So Saquon, we're going to give him a 40% chance of hitting for 27 plus points. He's done it in 7 out of 15 games. This year's on for 29 plus in 7 out of 15 games. Obviously, Jalen Hurts has, I believe it's 13 rushing touchdowns. Saquon has 14. So that's a lot of rushing touchdowns that Hurts has taken away. Now, the scoring ceiling on the Eagles is a little bit lower without Jalen Hurts, but it all evens out to where Saquon is as likely as normal, or at least almost as likely as normal, to hit for 27 plus points in the spot. So give him a 40% chance. But when we move on from him, we got Josh Jacobs, 15% chance, going back to what his role has produced this entire season, going back to what his role produced last year. Obviously, keeping in mind that it's not like we are waiting on touchdown variance to swing back in his favor and him to finally start hitting some bigger scores. He's got 14 rushing touchdowns on the year, right? He's been hitting for the touchdowns, and he's still only been hitting for the types of scores that you would want from him at his price tag about 15% of the time. And playing in this tough matchup against Minnesota where it doesn't elevate his chances of hitting. Jonathan Taylor, again, we can go back over the years, but it's 15% chance of hitting. Chuba Hubbard in this spot, in this role against Tampa, I'd say 12 to 15% chance of hitting. So you got Saquon up at 40. A bunch of guys at 15, and then you got Achane, Cook, and Bucky Irving all about 20 plus. The problem with Cook, obviously, is that when he misses, his floor is really low. And then Bucky Irving, just a really good spot for him. Achane, good floor ceiling range for him. 24 plus points, and this is where things get really interesting, is we're looking at JT, we're looking at Jacobs, we're looking at Chuba, and we're like, 15% chance, that's not really what we want to pay up for. And then we get down to these less expensive running backs that are going to be drawing some level of attention. Aaron Jones, Rico Dowdle, Jerome Ford, Tyrone Tracy, Rachaad White. I've got all of them at 12%. Kendre Miller, 8%. Well, might as well pay a little bit more and get one of these guys who can go for 15%, or just avoid the guys with a 15% chance and go for the guys with a 20+% chance. Most interesting play down here, Breece Hall. Breece Hall has hit he's only 6.3K. He's hit for 24 plus points, which is kind of what you're targeting in this price tag. 4 times this season. He's got a 31 pointer on his ledger this year. And so because his floor is so low, we tend to kind of avoid him on these larger slates. Why take the risk on somebody like Breece Hall? Yeah, he's going to hit 25% of the time, but also when he misses, his misses are much lower. Other guys are like collectively through all the running backs available on a 12, 13 game slate, you're going to get enough hits from higher floor players that you don't need to take on the low floor of Breece Hall. But we get down to this slate that's pretty thin across the board at running back and only 8 games. All of a sudden, somebody like Breece Hall, who's going to hit at a much higher rate than other guys, it becomes worth it to take on that lower floor. So Breece Hall becomes very interesting in this spot. So typically we think about the running back position in terms of like the safety that we are getting at the running back position, and we don't want to take as many big swings at the running back position. On this particular week, though, we could see Josh Jacobs score 20 points, 18 points. We could see Jonathan Taylor score 17, 18, 20 points, as he typically does. We could see James Cook score 11 points. We could see Chuba Hubbard score 14 points. All of a sudden, and then if Saquon doesn't hit, right, with Kenny Pickett under center, all of a sudden we're looking at not that many good scores at the running back position. So taking swings on guys like Breece Hall, taking swings on guys like Achane, or even guys like Bucky Irving, who, he's splitting that backfield with Rachaad White, but really nice matchup and really nice range of outcomes for him, actually becomes more valuable than it would typically be. So the running back position, in terms of the picture in the puzzle box, the way we should think about the running back position this week should be a little bit different from the way that we think about it in typical weeks. And then at the wide receiver position, we want to recognize this is potentially a spot where we can win the slate this week. So again, even just going down below 35 points, here's some of the scores that we've gotten from wide receivers on this slate. Jordan Addison, we already mentioned him, his game north of 35 points and north of 40 points. He's a 33.2 pointer. Garrett Wilson has a 32.1 pointer and a 30 pointer. Malik Neighbors, again, it was with Daniel Jones under center, but a 31.7 pointer. Jalen Waddle is going to be back this week, 31.4 pointer. Tyreek, 31.1 pointer. Devontae Smith, 31 pointer. Again, Devontae Smith, 5,800 again, dealing with Kenny Pickett here, but still these types of scores on these cheaper guys, you don't get this at the running back position. Garrett Wilson is 6,100 and he's hit for 30 plus 2 times this year. Jaden Reed, this 30.1 pointer to go with his 36 pointer. So that's 2 times this year that Jaden Reed's hit at 5,900. Brian Thomas Jr. has the second game of 30 plus points in the last 4 weeks up here at 6.8K. And so really this place where our ceiling range on wide receiver is so much higher, and our chances of getting a big score at a lower price tag at wide receiver are so much higher. And so wide receiver really looks like a spot this week where we want to think about how we can win the slate at the wide receiver position. So kind of an interesting setup, right? Where typically at running back, we're saying, all right, this isn't the spot we're going to win. This is a spot where we try not to lose. But actually this week, it could be the spot where we try to win. And it could be the spot where we actually make enough of a difference to win. But then we also swing over to the wide receiver position and we say, yeah, this is kind of a spot where we want to try to take swings and try to win as well, because the ceiling on players at this position is so much higher. The range of outcomes is broader, but the ceiling is so much higher. And so this is going to be a week where you might have a lot of rosters with more volatility than you would typically have. Smaller field of contest, and your range of outcomes is much broader on these pieces than what you would normally go for on that type of build. And yet that might be the most plus EV way to build on this particular slate. So just a really interesting week, the way that the positional availability sets up and how things shake out for our most plus expected value ways to build rosters, our most plus EV ways to put ourselves in position this week. So yeah, think outside the box a little bit this week, with being only 8 games and then what these 8 games provide kind of dictates that we're going to build our rosters a little bit differently this week than we typically do. Potential game environments, obviously Minnesota, Green Bay, we already talked about the scoring upside in this game. And this is a spot where, again, like I think that, well, we'll touch on it right now. I think that some of these Packers pass catchers are interesting as one-offs. The Vikings give up the most or second most receptions to wide receivers, the most yards to wide receivers, most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, highest opponent pass play rate. It's tough to run against the Vikings. We got to kind of throw out this first game between these teams earlier in the year because Vikings jumped out to a 28-0 lead. Jordan Love threw the ball 54 times. Tucker Kraft hit in that game. Jaden Reed hit in that game. Dontavian Wicks hit in that game. So we're probably not seeing something like that again in this spot. But we could see 36, 38 pass attempts from the Packers, which they don't typically do. We could see 40 pass attempts from the Packers, which they don't typically do. And if Christian Watson's out, we just have really cheap price tags on Romeo Doubs, on Jaden Reed, on Dontavian Wicks, and on Tucker Kraft. And it's probable that one of these 4 guys puts up 19 plus points. In 8 out of 13 games, we've gotten 19 plus points from a Packers pass catcher. And if that's 8 out of 13 chance, right? Well, we bump that up a little bit for this matchup against Minnesota, where we expect higher passing volume, where Minnesota's not been great against pass catchers this year. So call it 10 out of 13 times, basically like 75 to 80% chance of us getting 20 points from a Packers pass catcher. Well, in the context of this slate and the price tags these Packers pass catchers have, that actually makes these guys really interesting to pay attention to. So I think you can take some one-off swings on Packers pass catchers, But generally speaking, I'm thinking about this game in terms of go all in, right? A quarterback and 3 total pass catchers from this game, maybe even 4 total pass catchers from this game. Hope that this is the game that separates, right? That nothing else takes off on this slate. It's only an 8-game slate. There's weather everywhere. There's weird setups everywhere. Maybe nothing else takes off. Maybe nothing else scores more than 45 combined points, and this scores 65 combined points. And just loading up on this game environment is what is required to really separate. Carolina, Tampa, we also mentioned that one where we would expect Tampa to be able to score points against Carolina. And we should expect Carolina to keep this game competitive and close throughout. So that's another really interesting one for pulling one-offs. I already mentioned I'd like to consider a Bucks piece on every roster this week, but then also not just pulling one-offs, but thinking about, hey, maybe Baker Mayfield, maybe even Bryce Young, and building around this game environment. And then Buffalo and the Jets, again, another one that we touched on, but can Buffalo be pushed enough to put up like a monster game from Josh Allen, for him to have to be aggressive, for him to have to take over? Probably not. But can this be a game where Buffalo scores enough for Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson or Devontae Adams to end up having a good game? So the Jets, concentrated offense, and I think can do really well here in a game where Buffalo should score points. The Jets are playing well on offense and should be able to chase and produce something from one of these 3 pieces. So that's the clearest way to play it, but you could also play the game environment. You could play Josh Allen. You could play Aaron Rodgers and kind of bet on this game environment going a different direction. And then potential offenses to think about. We've got Miami, already talked about that, where, yeah, the weather is probably not great, and they're outside in December, which we typically avoid with Tua and with Miami, but 8-game slate, pretty weak slate across the board. And all of a sudden you think, okay, well, Miami can't really run the ball. What if they control this? What if they have 35 minutes time of possession and they're realizing, okay, well, in order to run out the clock, we got to just keep up our short passing attack. All of a sudden you end up with 40, 42 Tua pass attempts and a lot of PPR points piling up and opportunities for some big plays from this offense, maybe some short fields, some quick touchdowns. So Miami, an interesting offense to think about. Indianapolis, similar type of setup, right? Where what if it's just a lot of short fields and a lot of time with the ball, and even if they're not being that aggressive, just that time with the ball against a bad defense, that time close to the end zone against a bad defense just leads to all of a sudden it's a 30-7 game or a 34-7 game, and the Colts are just piling up points, and you're able to get multiple pieces from the Colts hitting for you on this slate. And then Philadelphia, probably lower probability than these other ones, but it's just such a concentrated offense. We saw A.J. Brown get 15 targets last week on only 28 pass attempts for Philadelphia. Kenny Pickett came in and just peppered A.J. Brown with targets. And so A.J. Brown certainly in the mix on the lower end. Right? He's very expensive. He's working with a backup quarterback against a good defense in a low, what's expected to be a low-scoring game environment, but he's certainly viable, right? He's off the board and he has ceiling, which on a slate this small could be difference-making. And then obviously Saquon being a guy worth paying attention to from this offense. Last note here from me is it just seems like a week to focus on good players, right? It is a week where, again, going back to like the Mac Jones versus Mason Rudolph thing, where you look at it and you're like, man, it is attractive to go to games like that. And if it's attractive to go to games like that, maybe that means too many people will go to games like that. And maybe that means that just playing good players is going to be an edge on this particular slate. So that's one of the things I want to be thinking about is kind of trying to build some rosters that are just full of good players and kind of a sneaky way to just be different from the field this week and potentially just have an edge on the field this week. Kind of a shorter show today than normal, not unusual. Pete and I usually go about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 20. Today we went an hour. Squirrel and I usually go 30 to 40 minutes. Today we went 30, just a small slate, 8-game slate, not a lot to cover, but we will get to the bottom-up build and then get out of here with a slightly shorter Angles podcast than normal on a much smaller slate than normal. Bottom-up build, if you're not familiar with it, here's the idea. We're going to build with a 44K salary cap. This is going to force us to make some tough decisions. It is going to reorient our thinking and help us see the slate a little bit differently. And hopefully when we get back to building 50K salary cap rosters, this has opened up our eyes to see some of the ways that we can really maximize our ceiling on a slate. We also have a 44K salary cap contest called the Bottom Up Build Contest. It's free to enter. You can find the link in my player grid or in the BUB Challenge channel on the OWS Discord. If you're not on OWS Discord, by the way, we got, 6,000, 7,000 members on there. Most of the team is hanging out on there all the time. We focus a lot on DFS training, understanding the strategy, and game theory of this game that we play. And we have a lot of people who have been with OWS for 6 years at this point. So lots of time for them to have studied, gotten really sharp. So we have this super sharp community that's on Discord all the time, kind of sharing thoughts and ideas, developing their ideas around a slate. So a really great place to hang out, especially if you're a free member on OWS, don't have a subscription, but want to kind of pick up some of this stuff and just become a sharper DFS player. Hanging out with the community is a great way to do that. Again, you can find the link to the bottom-up build in the BUB Challenge channel or in my player grid. Build with a 44K salary cap, win free money on OWS, buy free courses, subscriptions, and whatnot. Okay, so what we want to look for here is cheap pieces, but we also want to look for ceiling. Again, one of the coolest things about the bottom-up build is we sometimes see 200-point scores ship the 44K salary cap contest. We have had weeks where the bottom-up build winner were outscoring winners of main slate 50K salary cap contest because we're thinking so much about how we pack in upside on these rosters. So always a fun exercise. What I did this week was I started out wanting to focus on Jordan Love double stack. And Jordan Love 6,200. I'm able to fit in Dontavian Wicks and Tucker Kraft on this roster. Tucker Kraft, a guy who's going to go overlooked, but just consistently putting up 10, 12, 13 points at 3,900 in salary. People are going to go to Jake Ferguson against the Eagles with Cooper Rush under center. Chigo Okonkwo is also a viable play down here, but I think Tucker Kraft, a really interesting pivot off those guys with similar ceiling and certainly could easily put up 15, 16, 18 points. Keep in mind his 24-pointer earlier in the year. Well, let's actually go back. He had 9 targets against Minnesota in week 4. Well, Jordan Love threw the ball 54 times, right? And everyone got excited about Tucker Kraft. Oh, Tucker Kraft's got this huge role. And it was like, no, don't play Tucker Kraft. Don't chase that this next week. Don't chase it. He saw 9 targets because Jordan Love threw it 54 times. Jordan Love is usually going to throw it 25, 30 times. Tucker Kraft's usually not going to see 9 targets. Well, a week later, Tucker Kraft is the most popular tight end on the slate because he saw 9 targets the previous week, non-repeatable. He comes out and sees only 5 targets and puts up 24 DraftKings points at massive ownership. Well, the rest of the season is played out. We see that everybody who played Tucker Kraft that week actually just got lucky. But we also see that Tucker Kraft is capable of putting up 24 plus DraftKings points on only 5 targets. Tucker Kraft is one of these guys who is going to go overlooked, certainly capable of putting up a big game, fits in really nicely on a Jordan Love roster. And as you see, we get low salary on both these guys, Tucker Kraft and Dontavian Wicks. Add them to a Jordan Love roster. We're telling a cohesive, comprehensive story. 2 guys who are priced at 3.9K. This is assuming Christian Watson is out this week. Now, you don't need, because of the price tags on the Vikings, you don't need a bring back. You could have a game where Addison puts up 15, Justin Jefferson puts up 22 to 24, Aaron Jones puts up 16, TJ Hawkinson puts up 12 or 13, and this is a high-scoring game with no individual pieces from the Vikings being required on this type of Jordan Love double stack roster. But you can have a bring back. And on this roster, I wanted to have a TJ Hawkinson bring back to do something really unique. So Hawkinson is a guy we typically want to avoid playing when Justin Jefferson's on the field because you're not prioritizing TJ Hawkinson when you can throw the ball to Justin Jefferson. But we did see a game earlier this year where TJ Hawkinson had 9 targets, put up 21 DraftKings points against the Bears. What do the Bears and Packers have in common? Well, the Bears are one of the best teams in the NFL against wide receivers. The Packers have given up the second fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers, but they filter a lot of targets to tight ends. So this is a week where we could see the Vikings come into this with a TJ Hawkinson-centric game plan, where they say, hey, let's focus on TJ Hawkinson. Let's force the Packers to adjust to stopping TJ Hawkinson, and hopefully that will free up Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson as we get deeper into this game. So TJ Hawkinson going on to this roster continues to help us save salary and do something really unique and different. I wanted to get one of the Jets pieces on this roster. So Davante Adams or Breece Hall, but I preferred Davante Adams. So spend up on Davante Adams on this roster. We will need to save salary from there. So Kavontae Turpin, who I think is really interesting leverage off of Jake Ferguson, off of Jalen Tolbert. Kavontae Turpin should be on the field a little bit more. The Cowboys try to get him 3, 4, 5 touches every single game. They get creative in how they use him, how they get him the ball. Well, with no CeeDee Lamb, that could become 6, 7, 8 targets, carries, bubble screens, short area throws, trying to get him the ball in space. Gives him a floor of 5, 6, 7 points at 3,400, but he also has a ceiling of 15 to 18 to 20 points at 3,400. And if he gets those points, again, it's leverage off of pieces that will be more popular than him. So kind of an interesting way to save salary this week. Not a guy I'm really excited about on 50K salary cap rosters in smaller field contests because there is some sharper value this week. But if you're talking about a 44K salary cap contest where you need to do something different to still grab some upside, or if you're talking about large field play, KaVontae Turpin is an interesting piece to consider this week. So that gives us a starting point of Jordan Love, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, and TJ Hawkinson in a comprehensive game environment bet. Devontae Adams and KaVontae Turpin rounding out wide receiver. Raiders defense to help us save salary here. And then we're going to be kind of thin at running back, right? So we can go, but we're not going to get up to, Saquon Barkley on this roster. But what we can do is we can go Bucky Irving at 6,700, and then we're going to have to take a little bit of downside, but also, enough upside to matter at the second running back spot with Alexander Mattison. We'll dive deeper into this in the player grid, but Alexander Mattison and Amir Abdullah, both very interesting in this offense. They've combined for 13 targets each of the last 2 games and close to 20 carries across the last 2 games. So kind of splitting that work up, and both these guys have opportunities to hit. So Alexander Mattison, a guy people will not be on in a good matchup in a game where the Raiders should lean on the run. 5,600 kind of helps us round out this roster, giving us a final roster of Jordan Love, Bucky Irving, Alexander Mattison, Davante Adams, KaVontae Turpin, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, TJ Hawkinson, and the Raiders defense spending $43.9K in salary with $6.1K in salary left over. That is going to do it for this week's Angles podcast. We have one more of these coming next week. We've got content coming out throughout the weekend. The scroll, keep an eye on that. My player grid will come out on Friday evening. The rest of the content will be rolling in Friday night, Saturday. I will see you on the site throughout the weekend. I will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I'm out of here, and see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.